Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto. I'm here with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. As you know, Brad, this season we're spicing things up a bit. We're here to talk about OPP, other people's problems.
Well, and for those listening for the first time this season, Michael, tell them what we're doing with OPP.
We're going to tell public stories in the news and then talk about some legal lessons that can be learned from these fascinating stories. And Brad, what I like about that is that we don't have to be as restrictive because it's not attorney-client privileged information.
This is true. It is in the public. And now, before we get into today's OPP story, I want to ask you, what does the Cabbage Patch, the RoboCop, the Running Man, and the Roger Rabbit have in common?
Well, Brad, we're roughly the same age, so I do know that those are some sweet dance moves.
That's right. There's some dance moves that every kid in the 80s tried to master or break themselves trying to master. Of course, that goes along with the moonwalk, the worm, and everyone's favorite, the sprinkler. And, you know, what was your go-to dance move from the 80s, Michael?
I'm going to have to go with the bus driver.
That's another good one, audience members. Only an old man like Michael would know that. And, of course, I laugh because I know about it, too.
Yes.
Okay, since most of these moves, have to do with dancing kind of by yourself or kind of as a group, did you ever learn, Michael, how to swing dance or two-step?
Brad, I hate to confess this, but dancing is not like typing.
Oh, so you did not go to stage for dancing.
I have very nimble hands and 2 left feet. I cannot dance.
All right, fair enough. Well, as you know, I went to TCU, go Frogs, where, for those who don't know, that's where the West begins. And a good friend of mine from Midland, Texas, Shelly Browder, taught me how to two-step. And, of course, the rest is history. I'm not bragging since you have 2 left feet, but I think of the two of us, everyone here in the podcast knows that I'm better at two-stepping than you now.
Okay, Tex. I'm sure you got some trophies at home from your National Two-Stepping Awards there, right?
That's right. I'm glad you noticed. I have them hanging in my office. Second, if I'm at a wedding or a bar or a party, you would always find me out on the dance floor, obviously showing off my amazing national skills. But unless you're really at a dance studio or you're a backup dancer for J-Lo, it's really normally kind of frowned upon to just start kind of throwing out some dance move while you're in the middle of the office.
Yeah, I wish it would slow you down now that you recognize that we could use a little less Brad dance at the office. But I agree that it's not a good idea, Brad, and so let's stop.
All right. Well, I was going to show off some dance moves, but obviously with our audio portion of the show, I didn't want to deprive our listeners of seeing me really cut that rug. But a few years ago, I read this national story. It was actually all over the national story about today's OPP. And this person really liked dancing so much that she cut it into her day-to-day medical practice.
Can I use the red flag ding button for a Brad joke that I see just blaring at me with the cut reference, knowing we're going to be talking about doctors? Okay, Brad, fine. Who's the lead character for today's OPP story?
Yeah. So, audience members, we're not going to use this person's name, but she's famously known as the dancing doctor.
Brad, we're not going to start calling you the dancing lawyer, so don't go there.
Oh.
If you Google the dancing doctor, the number 1 article that pops up has the headline, Dancing Doctor Agrees to 2.5-year suspension of medical license. Audience members, you're welcome to Google any story that we bring up this year for more context. But I'll add that this doctor here is a licensed dermatologist who also performs surgeries like tummy tucks and Brazilian butt lifts. And for those who are not familiar, these types of surgeries are outside the course of normal training for the specialty of dermatology.
Yeah. So let's take a big step back to introduce the dancing doctor. Michael, I think you may have, but have you ever heard of YouTube?
Man, that is a big step back. I hope you don't, accidentally trip and fall there. Yes, Brad, I have heard of YouTube. Actually, Brad, did you know that our show that we're doing right now is actually published on our YouTube channel? Yes, we
Oh,
have a YouTube channel.
whoa.
So why are you asking me, old man?
All right. So, well, since you are familiar with it, and yes, we do have our show that's being live or actually being delivered right now on the YouTube channel. YouTube has over 300,000 videos or 80 hours of video uploaded every day.
80,000 hours of video uploaded every day? Oh, wow.
And as the name suggests, this dancing doctor loved uploading videos on YouTube with her dancing.
What's wrong with that?
She did it while working.
Okay, well, don't want to tempt you to do it, but again, what's wrong with that?
Okay, maybe I'll give more context. In one video, she is dancing with her staff, rapping, and all of them are following some pre-planned dance moves.
Well, so little synchronized dancing, maybe not the most efficient use of a work day, but still not sure where you're going with that being a problem.
Maybe I'll give a little more context in that. Did I mention that she was dancing with her OR staff while a patient was under sedation with a scalpel in her hand while performing a tummy tuck? And sometimes the video showed her cutting to the rhythm of the music to a song called Cut It. As the song begins, her fingers roll off the patient's skin and then she moves them to the beat. Then she begins to slice in the air with her scalpel just inches from the patient's back. Then the video reportedly shows the doctor making incisions while her scalpel is going to the rhythm of the music. However, she pauses to wave the scalpel at the camera while the music continues to play.
Whoa, man, I wish I would have reserved my ding comment for this, what you just said. I think I had about 10 ding buttons going back to the red flag season, but we're not having that season, there, even though there's a ton of red flag moments. And by the way, the visual that you just created of what that must have been like is something I can't unsee in my brain now.
Right. And so, hence, she became known as the dancing doctor, which I guess, again, to your point, it would be great if she was doing this, with her staff in the ballroom or in a dance off contest. But this was in an OR room, which, as you can imagine, may have led to some other issues for it to be on this season.
Well, we know this does not end well. Let's get into her story.
All right. In all, the dancing doctor reportedly appears in a little over 20 YouTube videos, all of which actually have been taken down.
Again, not the best use of the OR room or OR staff, but why are we discussing it on other people's problems?
Well, the dancing doctor, as you mentioned already, was a dermatologist and started having some patient complaints.
What do you mean by some? How many?
Well, enough to the point where several patients went on national news to show off their scars and discuss the pain they were enduring based on these medical procedures, some of which were also suing her for malpractice. These patients who have sued the dancing doctor claim her practice left them either disfigured. Unfortunately, one case suffered a permanent brain damage after her heart stopped following a 7-hour surgery.
Oh man, this sounds like there's some bigger problems than even the dancing.
Yeah, and even on the sidebar, some of these former patients also said their privacy was invaded when the dancing doctor posted these photos or videos of their exposed body on the social media sites. And again, they're saying that it was put on the YouTube or other sites while she was singing and operating.
Well, it kind of feels like we flew close to the sun on the dancing doctor because we at our firm actually had a close encounter with the dancing doctor.
Right. So, audience member, we're not giving away any attorney-client privilege here. We are sticking with the public knowledge. But so, number one, I did not win a two-stepping competition with the dancing doctor. I know y'all. That's probably right where they went. Number two, though, before she actually made national news, we actually had a physician hire us to review a contract and actually did join the dancing doctor's practice.
Yeah, and again, so some of this is stuff you could find in the newspaper, but I will keep it super confidential as we do. And at the time, we didn't even know that this doctor had an alias as the dancing doctor.
Yep.
But we had a plastic surgeon. She was called and said, "Hey, I just have a contract review," and she got engaged. I helped her. She was going to go join what we now know was the dancing doctor. Neither of us knew this at the time, but I can tell that my client, she did not. Like, she must have sensed something was up, and her big approach was, I want to make this move to get into this city, and I'm going to be super aggressive in my negotiations, to the point that it even made me uncomfortable. I was having conversations with my client saying, you're asking for the moon here, and just want you to be eyes wide open that, 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, you're going to get just a walk. They're going to walk away because
Mm.
you're being so unreasonable. And she wanted to persist, our client. And so we did. And the person, now known as the dancing doctor, accepted everything. And so we went forward. Our client signed the contract, and
Incredible contract, sounds like.
yeah, I mean, probably to date, if you count that as a win on what you can negotiate, probably the most successful contract I've
Good
ever
job,
negotiated.
Michael. Good
Yeah,
job, buddy.
yeah. Until she called me 4 days into starting
Uh-oh.
and said that she needed to get out of there ASAP, and did. She worked for 4 days for the dancing doctor, and realized some of what you saw. And of course, 6 months later, the news broke, and the dancing doctor was the famous dancing doctor who had a lot of injured patients, and it wasn't funny. It was actually, obviously, there are a lot of people that got hurt from this, and it's uh, beyond even just the shenanigans to get followers on YouTube.
Yeah. And so, audience members, so as Michael was kind of making sure, I hope you caught that, is it didn't take long for a plastic surgeon, our client, to see the problem that was happening at this dermatology practice. And well, as you can imagine, the medical board also started to take notice of this dancing doctor, and eventually found that her continued practice of medicine, quote, possesses a threat to public health, safety, and welfare, and required an emergency action in which they then suspended her medical license.
Yeah, that's not a good piece of information to get if you're a doctor,
Right.
that your license is suspended.
And audience members, after 27 years of practicing, thank you for that detailed analysis on that Michael.
Yes, no, yeah, it's frowned upon, as they would say.
Well, the board order actually was interesting about this, because as we started this, we started talking about all these other complaints, but the board order actually cited one case where a woman went in to see the dancing doctor for a liposuction breast augmentation and a Brazilian butt lift. The patient went for a post-operative visit, but the dancing doctor actually didn't even see or evaluate the patient. The patient unfortunately had to be hospitalized with a collapsed lung and suffered anemia because of acute blood loss. Again, not a good sign. The order from the medical board offers no details about what went wrong, but says the consultant concluded that the diagnosis, treatment, and record keeping didn't even meet the minimum standard. She failed to conform to the minimum standards of acceptable and prevailing medical practice, and the board noted a pattern of conduct and cited unsatisfactory treatment of 6 other patients.
Yeah, and what jumps off to me, Brad, from that is just that you have a dermatologist doing some pretty controversial things that dermatologists don't normally do. A Brazilian butt lift is even controversial among plastic surgeons. Not all of them will do these, and that they're the ones who have the training to kind of make that call. So you follow the dancing and down to the kind of these news stories of patients getting hurt, and it's not shocking to see these conclusions.
Yeah, and so like all good news outlets, they actually found a lawyer who was suing the dancing doctor, and this particular lawyer is representing four of the dancing doctor's patients, and and after the dancing doctor made national news, the lawyer received over 100 calls from other patients
Oh,
who said that they were suffering from similar problems from the dancing doctor's surgeries. And audience members, if you actually see the video and see some of the scars in these women, it's pretty grotesque. So, not saying you have to watch it, just understanding why there were so many probably complaints. And in these lawsuits filed against the dancing doctor, they accuse the dancing doctor of using unqualified staff, misleading patients, and subjecting them to an office that is not safe for these types of surgeries performed, as she actually operated on all her medical procedures in her medical office.
wow. Well, we've come full circle from the headline of the 2.5-year suspension. All those lines have been filled in with that story. It's pretty shocking, and my mind's spinning a little bit. Let's, Brad, go into commercial, and on the other side, start breaking this down from a legal perspective and why we do not recommend dancing in the OR.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, Brad, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Now, Michael, for this season, our theme is OPP.
Yes, Brad. Other than, I guess, realizing that the dancing doctor is better at dancing than performing surgery, what are some of your takeaways from kind of a legal perspective?
Yeah, and you started kind of hinting at some of them when they're opening. We're kind of going through the story, but for our listeners who didn't catch on to some of those pieces, I'm going to make, at least from my perspective, I caught two major issues that our listeners should really think about. And I can break it down to two: the scope of practice of a dermatologist, and then second, the standard of care. So let's talk about the scope of practice. So we've actually had other dermatologists. Dr. Paul Frank has been on our episode, and dermatologists play a great part in actually skincare. They typically will treat common acne, sunburn, and skin cancer. They diagnose, obviously, those or tumors, inflammation of the skin, or other types of infections and diseases of the skin. And sometimes they do perform some types of surgeries, normally skin biopsies or certain dermatological surgical. Man,
It's a mouthful.
many of these are basically some type of non-invasive surgical procedure, so it's not very invasive as your typical surgeon. However, a licensed provider, they can provide any kind of medical service because the dancing doctor is licensed. But a lot of these dermatologists, they don't, if they do something, they're probably not doing a tummy tuck or a breast aug or even a Brazilian butt lift. And that's just not to say that she couldn't get training. It's just to say that in their formal training, when they're becoming a specialist in dermatology, that's not something that a dermatologist would have gone through to understand how to perform those types of medical services. So that's the first point. I know you probably have some counter, but let me get the second piece of this because it kind of feeds into this first point, which is, and that brings us to the second point is, even if the doctor does have these skills that they've learned, and so that's great, and they're providing them, they have to still provide them within the standard of care for that medical service. So a lot of people are like, what does standard care mean? Standard care means the degree of care and skill an average healthcare provider with similar background and training under comparable circumstances would do. Of course, there are times where there are complications that every single doctor could not anticipate or prevent. Even the most skilled practitioner, especially physicians, if they're acting and they're acting within its customary care, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that falls outside this. So going back to, a doctor would need to have some type of professional understanding of what's going on, understanding the risk of that particular procedure, especially with surgery, and having the wherewithal to assist with any of those complications, which could be your staffing, and making sure that if a patient does go into cardiac arrest or have some type of paralysis, they have the people on staff to help with this. And clearly, especially with these types of surgeries, even if they are considered day surgeries or 23-hour surgeries performed inside their medical office, they need to take them serious. And a long time ago, you and I were on a panel with another lawyer, and he noted that his concern with these physicians using social media in the operating room, he wondered out loud with, again, the other doctors in the room, was the doctor more interested in the camera, or in this case, the dance moves and the spotlight versus the outcome of the surgery? Now, and there were other physicians that disagreed with this, but again, he's just saying, as a lawyer, talking about the risk associated, how would someone else views it? And as a reminder, this dancing doctor, at least from the medical board's perspective, was not doing that because on her good day, she had to get up her license for 2.5 years, and that's what she didn't even contest it, which demonstrated that most likely she was acting outside of the standard of care. And that brings us to the last piece I wanted to bring in, Michael, is there are other providers in that room. That could have been the anesthesiologist, that could be a nurse practitioner or a surgical tech. And if you're in a room where a physician is consistently acting outside the standard of care, you have to be careful because you could also be pulled into a lawsuit or in front of your board. So it's best not to participate.
Yeah, and I would add there, Brad, that thinking about the fact that the dancing doctor got sued a bunch for malpractice. The standard of care is central in a malpractice lawsuit,
Yes.
and it's did you perform the standard of care? Well, the dancing doctor had a lot of issues, right? I
Yeah.
mean, she was doing surgeries that was not part of her formal training. We don't know what her informal training is, but that even in a standard of care argument is a tougher road to establish that you have that appropriate training when you have bad outcomes,
Yes.
especially.
Agree.
But then you factor in just optically that she's got these YouTube videos doing these dances. And is that something you normally see in an operating room scenario? And the answer is no, although it's more and more common with Snapchat and TikTok than it used to be. But it would still be something where something goes wrong. They're looking to see, did you stay within the standard of care? And they're playing in front of a jury this video of the doctor doing a dance routine. It's not going to look good.
Yeah.
And then of course, if there's actually there's smoke, there's fire behind that smoke, and the fact that she didn't have the training, it's a really bad combination.
Agree.
But I would even take that, Brad, and go back to our side story.
Yeah.
Which is, we had a doctor that was our client that went to join this practice. And what should people do when they're looking to go join a practice to protect themselves from affiliating with someone that it would not be beneficial to affiliate with? And you could reverse that too. Like if a practice is recruiting a doctor that is, the emerging dancing doctor, how do they protect themselves from bringing that element and risk into their practice? And so it's what's interesting is that I can look back and know that our client, that she sensed something was up without knowing any of this.
Mhm.
But she just knew something was off from the interview process, and I don't know what it was, but there's something there. I would say that there is, beyond the contract. We talk about this, aligning expectations when we give lectures, and there is a clinical due diligence element to working together with somebody, and that's looking at, does the way you practice or want to practice line up with who you'll be side by side with, understanding, from a reputation perspective, if you are a physician with another physician, that person's reputation on on the internet, the reputation in general,
Mm-hmm.
is going to have some passover onto you just by virtue of being together. I mean, I personally experienced this by being your partner, and I've gotten over it. I mean, I've learned to adapt and no, I'm eyes wide open. So
yes, audience members, as he says this, he's trying to hug me. So I don't know. I don't understand what's going on here.
I know it's dysfunctional.
And I think that the part that I think an audience should take away, at least on a high level, as far as this person may be, the dancing doctor may be the nicest person on the earth. We've never met her, and could just be a great dermatologist in general. It was the fact that she added two elements to her practice. And again, we know of dermatology practices and that do have surgical practices a part of it. So it's nothing against dermatologists having surgeons as a part of it. The point being is she was doing two things that seemed to be the outliers, which was videotaping themselves in a surgical room while a patient was under care, whether or not she was actually performing the surgery or while they were recovering, either way. And then the board on top of that felt like even if she wasn't operating while dancing, it seemed to be all with falling outside the standard of care. I think that's the big pieces I keep going back to on this one, among the other things you just brought back up.
And we didn't even get into kind of a little nugget you referenced, which is that patients were saying they didn't even know they were getting videoed while they're operating, which has all sorts of patient privacy implications and risk from a liability perspective.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts?
Well, Brad, since I kind of made fun of you at the end, I feel like we need to do some two-stepping to kind of bring it all together.
Sandusy-do?
Yeah.
All right. Well, audience members, hopefully you guys understand that the next time you see Michael and I when we're dancing, you'll know that I'm better than him. But more importantly, we will continue through this season with no repeat.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.